So, if you haven't heard, Canada has recently struck a new deal with China. As you can guess, thanks to the actions of a certain President Donald Trump with his tariffs and the rhetoric about Canada becoming the 51st state, Canada now sees the US as an unreliable trade partner. And because of that, we are switching from one unreliable trade partner to another partner with their own share of controversies, to put it lightly. Personally, this deal to me looked very alarming on paper. I don't know about you, but for me personally, I grew up with the rhetoric that China, and I am purely talking about the Chinese government, the CCP, and China as a country, not about the Chinese people, okay? I grew up with the rhetoric that China is untrustworthy. After all, it was not too long ago when Sri Lanka defaulted on a Chinese loan, resulting in China seizing the infrastructure they have built in the country. So does Canada face these same risks? In this video, I want to answer my own questions about the specifics of this deal and how this might affect the regular everyday Canadian, me and you. What specifically does this deal entail? What is Mark Carney trying to achieve with this deal? And of course, what are the essential things we everyday Canadians need to look out for as this deal coalesces? Because while the headlines look like we're jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, the reality of 2026 is a lot more nuanced. And I'd say a lot more hopeful. So before we dive into the meat of the agreement, we need to address the Sri Lanka elephant in the room, so to speak. So to understand if Canada is in danger, let's just look at the math. The debt trap diplomacy that I heard about and had fears of is actually usually targeting developing nations with low credit ratings that can't access traditional markets. Those countries take high interest loans from Chinese state banks to build massive ports or highways, and when they can't pay, China takes the collateral. Canada, however, is a G7 economy with a AAA credit rating. We don't take loans from China to build our infrastructure. We fund it ourselves through sovereign bonds or domestic private investment. So the risk of China seizing the port of Vancouver because we missed a payment, that is basically zero. The real risk for Canada is actually dependency and equity control. We don't need to worry about them owning the bridge. We need to worry about them owning the critical mineral mines that power the world's batteries, or them having the power to turn off our agricultural exports the moment we criticize them, and more on that later. On January 16, 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Xi Jinping finalized the Canada-China Economic and Trade Cooperation Roadmap. To be clear, this is not a free trade deal where everything becomes open border and we're freely trading everything with each other willy-nilly. This is a highly targeted strategic partnership designed to fix the damage caused by the 2024-2025 trade war. Here's what I believe to be the three most important things that will affect our lives and the Lower Mainland the most. 1. Agriculture. For the past year, Canadian farmers have been getting crushed. China had hiked tariffs on Canadian canola seed to a whopping 85%. Under this new deal, as of March 1st, 2026, those tariffs will drop to 15%. This unlocks roughly $4 billion in exports. For us in BC, the deal also removes anti-discrimination tariffs on lobster, crab, and peas. So if you noticed seafood prices fluctuating or heard about local fisheries struggling, this is the reset they've been waiting for. 2. Electric vehicles. So previously, Canada followed the US lead and hit Chinese electric vehicles with a 100% surtax. Carney has now scrapped that in favor for a 49,000 unit annual quota. These vehicles will now enter Canada with only a 6.1% tariff. The goal? To get the price of an EV under 35 grand for the average Canadian family by 2030. The catch? The US is mad. They see these cars as rolling surveillance and a threat to North American manufacturing. But again, more on this later. And 3. Lumber. BC and the federal government signed a specific memorandum of understanding to promote Canadian wood in Chinese urban construction. With the US constantly hitting our lumber with duties, the goal is to make China the primary buyer of BC's lumber. This could be a massive stabilizer for forestry jobs in the interior and Lower Mainland. I mentioned in the previous video that Mark Carney is looking for ways to turn the country around. His background as the former head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England makes him a numbers guy for sure. And the numbers are saying that the US, let's say, is just one big old pile of systemic risk. In early February 2026, President Trump threatened a 100% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods if we went through with this China deal. While the US House of Representatives recently voted to block those tariffs in a rare bipartisan rebuke, 219 to 211, the threat of a presidential veto remains. Carney's logic is simple. If the US can threaten to destroy 70% of our trade on a whim, what does that make us? Are we actually a sovereign nation, or are we a bullied hostage? By pivoting to China, Carney is attempting a strategic diversification. We can't replace the US entirely, obviously, and nor should we, but Carney is trying to build up a backup generator so that when the US goes down or becomes too expensive, Canada doesn't go dark. He's also using this as a carrot, so to speak, to get Chinese companies to build factories in Canada. By dropping the tariff from 100% down to 6.1%, Canada has made itself the most profitable place in North America for a Chinese EV company to sell its cars. Since the US still has a 100% wall, companies like BYD, Cheryl, and the contemporary Amperex technology, the world's biggest battery maker, see Canada as their only viable beachhead in North America. The goal is to make these companies so dependent on their Canadian sales, they feel forced to build joint venture factories on Canadian soil to protect their market share. Carney's logic is that if we simply buy Chinese cars, our money leaves the country. But if we onshore their technology, three things happen. One, job protection. As traditional gas car plants, like those in Oakville or Windsor, face uncertainty, we replace those jobs with EV and battery manufacturing jobs. Two, tech transfer. Canadian engineers and workers get to learn the secret sauce of Chinese battery tech, which is currently 3 to 5 years ahead of anything in North America. Three, the Kuzma defense. So, if a BYD car is built in Ontario with a high percentage of Canadian parts and labor, Carney argues that it should technically be considered a Canadian product under our trade deals. He's even betting that a protectionist US government will find it harder to tax a made in Canada car than a made in China one. And also, all of this comes with its obvious risks, primarily the Trojan horse fear. Critics and the US government worry that even if the car is made here, the software is still controlled by Beijing. This is why Carney is emphasizing trusted partners and joint ventures. He wants Canadian firms to control the brains of the cars. Like I mentioned, I grew up with the rhetoric that China, again, I'm talking about the CCP, not Chinese people in general, is the enemy. But in actuality, the 2026 sentiment is shifting. An Ipsos poll from January 2026 found that 54% of Canadians now support closer trade ties with China. Compare that to 2020, during the two Michaels crisis, when 80% of us wanted to run the other way. If you don't know what this two Michaels crisis is, let me know in the comments and I'll do a separate video about it. But anyways, why the change? Well, it's affordability. Canadians are tired of being broke. Damn, is that real? Anyways, we are prioritizing economic opportunity over shared values for the first time in a generation. In fact, a research poll from February 2026 shows that while we still distrust the Chinese government, we view the current US trade posture as an equal, if not greater, threat to our daily survival. We still don't see China as a friend, but my god, are they a great customer who is actually willing to pay for our goods without threatening to annex us. As this deal coalesces, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Here are the three specific things that I personally will try to be watching out for. 1. The backdoor surtax. The US has already threatened that if China parts make up too much of the Canadian-made goods, they will tax us as if we are China. Watch for the news for rules of origin disputes. If we lose the US market, bruh, no amount of Chinese canola sales can save us. 2. The interference issue. The deal includes cooperation on public safety and synthetic drugs. We need to see if this actually stops the flow of fentanyl, or if it's just a smokescreen. If the Chinese government continues to interfere in our elections or set up police stations in Richmond or Burnaby, the public support for this deal will evaporate instantly. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments, and I'll make a separate video on the issue. And 3. Critical mineral ownership. Watch for joint ventures. If Carney allows Chinese state-owned firms to buy up the lithium and copper mines in BC and the North, we are trading our long-term future for a short-term trade win. So what can we actually do? How do we live in this new reality without feeling like a pawn in a global chess game? Well, I don't know, but here's what I'm gonna do. 1. Diversify my own portfolio. Just as Canada is diversifying away from the US, I'm gonna start looking at new markets opening up. If you work in tech, logistics, or agriculture in the Lower Mainland, the China pivot means new jobs and new certifications. Maybe look into Asian Pacific trade certifications. They're probably going to be more valuable than a US-centric resume in the next 5 years. 2. Buy affordable tech, but verify security. When the 30 grand Chinese EVs hit the Vancouver market later this year, they're going to be tempting. But before you buy, check for the National Safety Mark. It's a literal label, usually found on the driver's side door jamb or the pillar when you open the door. This way, you can check to the best of our ability that the car follows the Canadian security certification that Carney's government promised. You know, to make sure that the data from your car isn't being pinged back to a server you don't trust. And 3, support value-added local business. The deal includes MOUs on modern wood construction. Support BC companies that are processing our lumber here instead of just shipping raw logs away. When you're doing renovation or buying furniture, don't just look for wood, look for the source of processing. Look for the BC Wood logo or ask your contractor specifically for BC processed engineered wood. If it's processed here, the jobs and the taxes stay here. One of the best ways to support the modern wood construction MOU is to stop local NIMBY, not my backyard, opposition to new developments, specifically mass timber ones. Mass timber, like cross-laminated timber or CLT, is a BC specialty. When a developer proposes an 8 to 12-story mass timber building in Burnaby or New Westminster, they are directly supporting the local value-added industry. When these projects come up for a public hearing, literally just write a quick email to your city council. Mention that you support the project because it uses sustainable BC manufactured mass timber. It sounds small, but city councils notice when green local jobs are used as a reason for approval. Also to note, the 2026 MOU specifically highlights Indigenous participation. Many First Nations in BC, like those involved with the First Nations Forestry Council, are moving from just harvesting the trees to actually owning the mills and processing plants. So support projects like the Indigenous Affordable Housing Project in Surrey, an 8-story mass timber hybrid, or the Nexus Project in Penticton. These projects use regionally harvested and manufactured timber. When you see a developer partnering with the First Nation for a wood project, this is another way of keeping wealth in BC. The raw log problem, where we ship a tree to another country and buy back the table, is a choice we make every time we prioritize the cheapest possible price over the local value. By choosing BC processed products and supporting local mass timber zoning, you're helping to ensure that the trees in our backyard aren't just a commodity for China, but a cornerstone of our own economy. And 4, vocalize your standards. Use that power to vote. Let your MP know that you support trade, but only if it comes with strict transparency on foreign interference. We want their business, not their bureaucracy. So here's my optimistic take. For the first time in years, Canada is acting like a middle power with an actual backbone. We are standing up to our biggest neighbor and saying, yo, man, we got other options. This deal is a gamble, but it's a gamble made from a position of economic logic rather than fear. At least that's how I see it. We are seeing a cooling of the trade war that has kept grocery and fuel prices high. We are seeing a path toward affordable green tech. And most importantly, we are seeing a government that is finally willing to innovate rather than just wait and see what Washington decides for us. Vancouver is the gateway to this new Pacific reality. We are in the best possible position to benefit from this shift. I think we are finally becoming a Canada that is independent and pragmatic. And I am very hopeful for our future.